told this story many times, because even to this day, I can't really explain what happened. In all actuality, this is likely more my mother's story than it is mine. My brother says he remembers it too. I don't know whether to believe him, since his accounts vary from time to time. My father was in the military for most of my formative years, up until I was a junior in high school. I was the only granddaughter on my mother's side, and with my grandmother spoiling me, my mother wanted desperately to get me away. She didn't want me to become entitled. When I was 2, my dad received orders to England. Mom was thrilled. It was an exciting change. We packed up and moved as soon as we were able to, suddenly a world away from everything my parents had ever known. Mom wanted to experience this new culture to the fullest, and didn't like the idea of living on base. So while Dad worked, she quickly went to work trying to find the perfect place for us to live. It came in the form of a beautiful, older 2-story house in an area called Mildenhall. I remember it being very suburban and a very warm and happy place to be. The house was often rented to military families, since the base was only about 20 minutes away. Mom said we moved in very quickly and settled nicely. She said nothing really happened there, at least not at first. The house was warm and welcoming, till I turned 3, when my mom had my baby brother. It started off small things, like keys not being where you put them, change found in odd places. Mom didn't think much of it, since she had a hyper 3-year-old in the house. It started to build after a while, though. The TV turning itself on and off when no one was in the room. It was one of those old TVs, too. The ones that would get the orb of light in the center if you turned it off too quickly after turning it on. We often came into the room with that little orb in the center of the screen. The toilet would flush on its own. Mom was a hardcore skeptic, and with 3 little kids in the house, she refused to acknowledge anything that might scare us. Instead, she ignored it, waving it off as faulty wiring and pipes. It was an old house, after all. Then we started coming home to open cabinets and drawers. It was always the high ones, the ones none of us could reach. Mom said it was about the time my youngest brother was born that suddenly everything became crazy. I remember playing in the living room, my mom just down the hall doing laundry, when suddenly there was a crash from the kitchen. My brother and I looked over, startled, him having been in the room watching TV. My younger brothers were both upstairs having naps. Mom came rushing in, asking what happened. I remember pointing at the door. It wasn't until I was older that I found out what happened. Mom went into the kitchen to find that a bowl had exploded in the sink. She'd planned on coming out and asking which of us did it, but as she made her way out, another crash caused her to stop. A plate that had previously been in the drying rack on the counter was now shattered on the floor behind her. She couldn't believe it. She told me she glared into the kitchen and said, "Knock it off. The babies are sleeping," and walked out. That was it. She told us not to go in there while she cleaned, and that was that. For a long time, nothing else happened. Life went back to normal for a while. Mom had decided if there was something in the house, it wasn't really bad, it just wanted attention. She wasn't going to give it that attention. So, it stopped focusing on her. This is where I remember what happened, at least to me. I was just about to turn 5. It was only a few months from my birthday. I didn't know that at the time, though. It was getting late, and the sun was starting to set. But it was still light enough to not need a light on. I had stolen my older brother's pound puppy doll and was playing a game on my bed, a quick game before Mom came in and made me go to sleep. I remember putting the doll on the windowsill and going back to my game. A few minutes later, I remembered the doll and reached out to grab it off the windowsill. As I did, a dark hand came out from under my bed, a shadow against the wall under the windowsill. I stared at it, and I remember looking behind me and waving. My shadow was on the wall behind me, the sun coming in my window being the only light in the room. I looked back and I froze. Though I had been waving, the shadow under the window had not. I remember staring hard at that spot on the wall, when suddenly the hand began to wave back. I couldn't breathe. I scrambled off my bed as quickly as I could, the hand on the wall, even though I wasn't anywhere near it. It stopped waving and disappeared back under my bed, long after I was on the other side of the room. I had tears soaking my face. I tried to scream for my mom, but my throat had constricted in pure terror. I ran to the door, I threw it open, and I ran as fast as I could down the stairs, completely convinced it was going to get me. I scrambled over the baby gate at the bottom of the stairs and ran desperately to my mom, screaming there was something under my bed. My mom and dad were, of course, skeptical. I was only 4 after all. It was about the right age to have monsters in my closet and under my bed. What was odd was me not being convinced after they did a sweep of the room. I refused, absolutely refused, to sleep in my room as long as there was a gap between the bottom of my bed and the floor. Dad eventually got fed up and just took my mattress off my bed frame. After that, everything started to build up again. Cupboards and drawers opening or slamming, the TV turning itself on and off. Then the most frightening things started happening. The front door, which had a heavy deadbolt lock and sliding chain lock, began unlocking itself and opening and closing. All the while, my parents tried to ignore what was happening. The last time anything happened, though, was probably the reason I'm so frightened of being home alone now as an adult. The neighborhood we lived in was very safe and very friendly. It wasn't uncommon to leave our doors unlocked at night. Whether it was intentional or we just forgot, it wasn't a big deal then. I remember being woken up. It was dark, and my parents' light was off down the hall. I don't remember what woke me up. When I heard walking downstairs. This was frightening because footsteps were new. Up until this point, I hadn't heard them. I was silent and I listened, hiding under my blanket, when I heard the sound of a door closing and the heavy click of the deadbolt. Not a minute later, I heard the doorknob rattle and the door shake, then a thud. The light came on in my parents' room, and I heard heavy footsteps of my dad coming down the hall and towards the stairs. Dad flipped on the light to the stairs and the rattling stopped. Someone had tried to break in, and they would have done so if the door hadn't been locked. A lock I distinctly heard click before the rattling. We didn't learn the story of the house until we were moving out, when one of the neighbors had told us about another American family that had lived there years before. Their daughter had died in the States, just before her family had moved out to England. They swore she followed them there, and that my room was supposed to be her room. While I have scarier stories that have affected me over the years, this is the one that affected me the most. Proving to me that just because something can seem menacing, it might just be you can't see the whole picture. There is evil out there. I know that much. But thankfully, this was not.